I remember the exact moment my world split in two. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September, the kind of day where the air smells like dying leaves and something final. I was standing outside Gate 7 of Fort Bragg, our 18-month-old son, Noah, balanced on my left hip, his chubby fist clutching my collar while I held a hand-painted welcome home sign in my right hand. Megan's unit was returning from a 7-month deployment to Germany. 7 months of video calls that cut out at the wrong moments, 7 months of sleeping on my side of a bed that felt too wide, 7 months of telling Noah that the woman in the photograph on the nightstand was his mother and she was coming home soon. I had driven 3 hours for this. I had gotten Noah dressed in a tiny outfit that said, "My mom is my hero." I had practiced what I was going to say when I saw her face. The convoy pulled through the gate and the crowd around me erupted. Families pressed forward, children screaming, American flags snapping in the breeze. I hoisted Noah higher and moved toward the marked reunion area, scanning the faces of soldiers filing off vehicles. And then I saw her. Megan looked exactly the way she always did in uniform, tall, composed, her dark hair pinned perfectly under her patrol cap, her posture carrying that particular authority that came with her rank. Colonel Megan Harris. My wife. The woman I had built my entire adult life around. She was laughing. I noticed that before anything else, the laugh. Open, unguarded, her head tilted back the way it only tilted when she was genuinely happy, not the polite smile she deployed in professional settings. She was standing with a soldier I didn't recognize. He was younger than her, maybe late 20s, broad-shouldered, handsome in the way that young soldiers often are before the years grind them down. He was still in full kit. And as I watched, he reached out and adjusted the collar of her jacket with both hands, the way you straighten something on someone you have touched 1,000 times before. She let him. She stood completely still and let him touch her uniform in front of 50 people, and she smiled at him while Noah's sign drooped in my hand. Then the soldier stood at attention and gave her a salute that lasted exactly 1 second longer than regulation required. It was the kind of salute that says something else entirely. And Megan returned it with a look that I had seen before. I had seen it across dinner tables and in the dark of our bedroom, a look that does not belong on the face of a senior officer receiving a standard military courtesy. I stood there with my son on my hip and my hand-painted sign going limp, and I understood everything in the space of 4 seconds. Noah said, "Mama," and reached toward her. I pulled him back without thinking. The first thing I felt was not rage. It was something colder and more clarifying than rage. It was the sudden, horrible sensation of a man realizing he has been the last to know something that everyone around him may have understood for a long time. My chest went completely hollow. Then the hollowness filled with something molten, and I gripped Noah so tightly he made a small sound of protest, and I loosened my hold and kissed the side of his head and said, "I see her, buddy. I see her." I did not walk toward Megan immediately. I stood where I was and I watched. I needed to be sure. I needed to burn it into my memory with absolute precision, because I already knew, somewhere in the part of me that processes truth before the conscious mind catches up, that I was going to need it. The soldier said something close to her ear. She responded without stepping back. Her hand briefly touched his arm, not a congratulation, not the casual contact between colleagues, but something deliberate and familiar. Then she looked up, scanned the crowd, and found me. Her expression shifted. Something moved across her face that I now recognize was not guilt, it was recalibration. She was rearranging herself in the half-second before she smiled and raised her hand in a wave. I waved back. I smiled. I do not know how I smiled, but I did it, for Noah, because my son was stretching his arms toward his mother and I was not going to make this moment ugly in front of him. Not yet. She crossed the distance between us and reached for Noah first, which I will always be grateful for because it meant she wasn't looking directly at my eyes when I settled my face back into something neutral. She pressed her cheek against his and he grabbed her ears with both hands the way he always did and said, "Mama home," and she laughed and said, "Mama's home, baby," and for a moment it almost felt real. Then she kissed me. It was a greeting kiss, the kind you give someone you are performing normalcy for, and I knew the difference because I had kissed Megan Harris approximately 2,000 times over 6 years and I had memorized the texture of genuine desire versus managed obligation. I had just never needed that information before. "You came all this way," she said. 3 hours, I said. Wouldn't miss it. She smiled with her eyes in the right place, and for anyone watching, we looked exactly like what we were supposed to be, a decorated officer reunited with her husband and son after a long deployment. The picture of an American military family. I carried Noah to the car. I loaded his bag in her duffel. I drove us toward the hotel I had booked for the night because the 3-hour drive home seemed too long with a toddler, and Megan sat in the passenger seat and told me about the last weeks of the deployment, and I said yes and I know and that sounds exhausting and all the right things. And I filed away every detail of what I had seen. His name, I discovered from the unit roster I found posted publicly on the base Facebook page that evening while Megan showered, was Captain Daniel Reeves. He had been under her command in Germany. According to the posts and tags I worked through methodically while Noah slept in the portable crib, he had arrived in the unit approximately 8 months ago, 1 month before she deployed. I sat in the bathroom of that hotel with the fan running so she couldn't hear me, and I did not fall apart. I want to be honest about that because it matters to what happened next. I did not fall apart in that bathroom. I made a list on my phone in the Notes app, a simple list of what I needed to know and what I needed to do, and I began working through it with the kind of systematic clarity that I think only comes when grief and fury combine into something that has no more room for tears. I had been with Megan for 8 years. We had met when she was a captain and I was finishing a graduate degree in civil engineering. I had built my career around her postings, taken remote work, turned down promotions, relocated twice. I had been the one to want children when she was ambivalent, and I had won that argument gently, and I had been the one who set up the nursery and researched pediatricians and learned to make the particular pureed sweet potato that Noah would actually eat. I had loved her with the specific devotion of a man who genuinely believed he had found the person he was supposed to find. I thought about the last year, the deployment announcement coming faster than expected, the way she had seemed almost relieved when orders came through, the video calls that grew shorter and less frequent after month 3. I had attributed all of it to the weight of command. I had been generous with my interpretations. I had been a fool. By the time Megan came out of the shower, I had composed myself into something resembling a normal husband. We put Noah to bed together and she said she had missed this and I said I had missed her too, and technically both of those statements were true, just not in the way she understood them. I barely slept. I lay beside her in the dark and I thought about Noah, who was 18 months old and had just learned to say "Dada" with startling clarity and ran to me when he heard my key in the door, and I made myself think about him for a very long time before I thought about anything else. 3 days after we returned home, I called my oldest friend, a man named Tom Garrett who had been a groomsman at our wedding and who had worked in corporate intelligence before starting his own consulting firm. I told Tom everything I had seen, everything I had found on the public pages, and I said I needed help building a complete picture before I did anything irreversible. Tom said, "How sure are you?" I told him about the collar. About the salute. About the look. He said, "Give me a week." Tom was actually faster than that. Within 5 days he had documented what I needed, phone records showing the volume and timing of communication between Megan's number and Daniel Reeves beginning 6 months into her previous stateside posting, location data consistent with meetings that had not been mentioned to me, and, most damning, a series of photographs taken by a private investigator Tom recommended, photographs from the final 2 weeks of the deployment, when I had been told the unit was in lockdown communications due to exercises that showed Megan and Captain Reeves at a restaurant in Fayetteville the night before the convoy home. She had been 20 miles away 2 weeks ago and she had not told me. She had been 20 miles away and had chosen to spend the evening with him rather than make the call that I had sat waiting for. I looked at those photographs for a long time. Then I printed them, all of them, and put them in a manila envelope in the filing cabinet in my home office, behind Noah's vaccination records. The next thing I did was call my brother-in-law, Megan's younger brother, a man named Craig who had always been closer to me than to his own sister and who had been vocal in the past about what he called Megan's habit of treating the people who loved her like logistical considerations. I told Craig what I had. He was silent for a long time and then he said, "Peter, I'm sorry, man. I'm not surprised, and I'm sorry." I asked him one question: who in Megan's family and professional circle would need to know, and how would they need to hear it? Craig said, "Start with Dad." Megan's father, General Richard Harris, retired, was a man I genuinely respected and who had treated me with more warmth than his daughter sometimes did. He had served 30 years. He had very particular views about honor and integrity that his daughter had apparently not inherited in full. Craig and I agreed that the general needed to hear from me directly, privately, before anything else happened. I also called my lawyer. Her name was Rebecca Caldwell and she specialized in military divorce cases. I told her the situation in full, including the Uniform Code of Military Justice implications of adultery between officers, or between an officer and a subordinate, because Captain Reeves had been under Megan's direct command, and that changed the legal picture considerably. Rebecca said she committed adultery under the UCMJ with a junior officer in her own unit. That's not just a divorce matter. I know, I said. Peter, how do you want to handle this? Completely, I said. I want to handle this completely. Rebecca began preparing the divorce filing. I continued living in my house, sleeping in my bed, driving Noah to daycare, having dinner with my wife, because I was not ready to move until everything was in position. This is the part that cost me the most. Not the discovery, not the evidence gathering, those felt like action, like agency. The performance of normalcy while I moved the pieces was the thing that wore at me, and I want to be honest about that because it was not painless and it was not cold. Every night I lay beside a woman I had loved for 8 years and felt the full weight of what she had chosen to do, and I had to keep my breathing even and my face blank, and some nights that was the hardest thing I have ever done. I had everything ready on a Saturday morning. Noah was at Tom's house. Tom's wife, Linda, had volunteered to take him for the day and I had accepted gratefully. I needed the house to be quiet for what was coming. Megan came downstairs in civilian clothes looking comfortable and unhurried, and she said she was thinking about brunch, and I said I needed to talk to her first, and something in my tone made her go still. I set the manila envelope on the kitchen table. She looked at it. She did not touch it. Open it, I said. Peter, open the envelope, Megan. She opened it. She went through the photographs slowly, and I watched her face go through the sequence, surprise, then a very brief attempt at calculation, then something that collapsed into what I think was genuine shame, though I was past caring about its authenticity. I can explain, don't. I said it quietly and it came out harder than shouting. I have been sitting on this for 3 weeks. I watched you at the gate. I watched him fix your collar. I watched the way you looked at him and I stood there holding our son. Do not tell me you can explain. She set the photographs down. How long have you known? Since the moment your convoy pulled through the gate. I saw everything. In front of 50 families. She had the decency to close her eyes. How long has it been going on? I asked. She didn't answer. I have phone records, Megan. I have a very competent investigator and a very thorough file. You were in Fayetteville 2 weeks ago. You were 20 miles from this house and you told me communications were locked down. You sat 20 miles away from your son and you chose him. It wasn't, Peter, it wasn't what you think, he was under your command, I said. In your unit. I talked to Rebecca Caldwell 3 weeks ago. I know exactly what that means under the UCMJ. The color drained from her face. How long, I said again, has it been going on? Since month 2 of the deployment, she said, and her voice was flat now, the military officer taking the position because the position had been taken from her. It was never supposed to, it happened and I didn't stop it. Did you ever intend to stop it? Silence. Were you going to tell me? I don't know. I nodded slowly. I had expected all of these answers and they still landed like individual blows to the sternum. I see. Peter, I know how this looks, Megan. I stopped her. I have built everything in my life around you. I turned down a project in Seattle because it conflicted with your posting schedule. I set up Noah's nursery alone while you were at a leadership conference and I didn't complain about that because I understood what your career required. I have been the person who made sure you could do what you do. And you decided that what you wanted was him. I paused. I've already filed. Rebecca will have the papers to your office by Monday. She stood up from the table. Peter, I'm going to need you to leave the house today. I've spoken to a family law attorney and you are entitled to take what's yours, but this house is in my name and I'm asking you to give me and Noah this space. I've arranged for you to have somewhere to stay. She looked like she wanted to argue. She looked like she wanted to appeal to something, history, guilt, love, but she had forfeited the currency for that conversation. She left by noon. She took 2 bags and her uniforms and she left, and I sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes in total silence, and then I called Tom and asked him to bring Noah home. When Noah walked through the door and said, "Dada," and ran toward me with his particular unsteady toddler gallop, I picked him up and held him for a long time, and I let myself feel everything that I had been holding back for 3 weeks, and then I put it away because he was patting my face with both hands and saying words I couldn't quite parse, and I needed to be present for him. The first strategic move came on Monday. I had already spoken to General Harris the previous Friday. That conversation had been one of the hardest of my life, not because the general was angry with me but because he was not surprised in the way I had hoped he would be. He was disappointed in the way of a man who has been watching a pattern complete itself. He said, "You deserved better, Peter. That boy deserved better." He asked what I needed from him, and I told him I needed him to know the full truth before anyone else shaped the narrative, and he said he understood. He said he would speak to Megan directly and that he would make sure his wife and Craig understood the facts as they were. The second move came through Rebecca. She had filed with the divorce court, and she had separately sent a formal letter to the JAG office at Fort Bragg outlining the documented adultery between Colonel Harris and Captain Reeves, including the documentation of their command relationship during the relevant period. I was told this letter would trigger an investigation under Article 134 of the UCMJ. The third move I made more quietly. Captain Reeves, I had learned from Craig's network, had been seeing a woman back home in Ohio, a woman named Ashley who, according to everything I could determine, had no idea what had happened in Germany. I found her through social media. I wrote her a letter, a real letter on paper, that contained the essential facts and copies of 2 of the least ambiguous photographs. I included no editorializing. I simply gave her the information she deserved to have and let her do what she chose with it. Within 2 weeks, Ashley had posted on her own social media that she had ended a long-distance relationship due to infidelity. She did not name names. She did not need to. The military community at Fort Bragg is not large, and the people who needed to connect the dots connected them quickly. The professional consequences for Megan unfolded with the particular bureaucratic gravity of the military justice system, slowly at first and then all at once. The UCMJ investigation was opened. Megan retained a JAG attorney. The inquiry into fraternization and conduct unbecoming an officer proceeded through its formal channels, and I was contacted twice by investigators who were professional and thorough. The process would take months, I was told. The potential outcomes ranged from formal reprimand to loss of rank to separation from the service. Her promotion to brigadier general, which had been pending review and which she had mentioned 3 times in the last year with barely concealed anticipation, was put on indefinite hold. I heard this from Craig, who heard it from the general, who heard it from people he still knew in that world. I received the news with less satisfaction than I had expected, not because she didn't deserve the consequences but because by then I had moved past the phase where her suffering registered as a form of relief. I had moved into something else, something quieter and more self-directed. The social consequences were less institutional but no less real. The Fort Bragg officers' community is a small world with a long memory and a strong current of opinion about conduct unbecoming. When the circumstances of the divorce became known, and in a community that size they became known quickly, the reactions were what you would expect from people who take the code seriously. Several of her close colleagues distanced themselves. Her mentor, a 2-star general named Fletcher who had championed her career for a decade, was notably silent at a ceremony where in previous years he would have publicly acknowledged her. Her mother called Craig, not Megan. Her father did not return her calls for several weeks. I know some of this because Craig told me. I know some of it because people talked to me directly. And I know some of it because I was still, legally, her husband for the months the divorce proceedings took, and information passed through channels in ways I had not anticipated. What I was focused on during those months was not Megan's collapse. I want to be clear about that. I had one central focus, which was building the best possible life for Noah in the aftermath of the bomb that had gone off in the middle of his family. I restructured my work arrangement to be more local. I had been doing primarily remote consulting and I negotiated a formal role with a firm in Charlotte that meant I could work from home 3 days a week and be in the office too. I set up Noah's room with new shelves and a reading corner because his language was exploding and he was obsessed with books. I found a pediatric therapist who worked with very young children and toddlers from separated families, and I made an appointment to discuss what Noah might need as he processed the change in his household structure. I was his person. I made sure he knew that in every way I knew how. I also, slowly, and then less slowly, started taking care of myself in ways that I had deferred for years. I had been running when Megan and I first met but had let it go during the years of managing the household solo during deployments. I started again, slowly at first, painfully, my body reminding me that I was 34 and not 25. I ran early in the mornings before Noah woke up, 3 miles at first, then 5, then 8. I lost the weight I had accumulated through the comfort eating of anxious years, and I slept better and my mind became clearer. My engineering firm offered me a lead project role on a commercial development in uptown Charlotte that was exactly the kind of work I had been positioned for years earlier when I had declined the Seattle opportunity. I took it. It was demanding and technically interesting, and it required me to operate at the top of my competence, and I found that I had more capacity than I had realized because I was no longer spending significant psychological energy on the management of Megan's needs and career logistics and the maintenance of a marriage that had apparently been hollowing out from one side for longer than I understood. I hired an excellent nanny, a woman named Janet who was 61 years old and had raised 4 children of her own and whose patience and warmth with Noah was visible from the first interview. She became essential. She made it possible for me to take the Charlotte role and to run in the mornings and to occasionally have dinner with a friend like Tom without Noah spending the evening anxious and alone. There was a moment about 5 months in, Noah was almost 2 by then, his language developing rapidly, starting to construct sentences with touching logic, when I came home from the Charlotte site and Janet had Noah in the kitchen at the table with coloring books, and he looked up when he heard my keys and said, "Daddy's home," with absolute conviction and delight, and I stood in the doorway of my kitchen and understood that this, exactly this, was what I was building toward. Not revenge, not watching Megan lose her promotion, not Ashley's social media post, not any of it. This specific thing. This child calling my name with joy. The divorce was finalized 7 months after I served the papers. The settlement was handled through Rebecca with minimal drama. Megan, perhaps aware that the legal and professional ground she stood on was not solid, did not contest the major terms. I retained the house. We established a co-parenting arrangement for Noah that prioritized his stability and gave Megan structured visitation, supervised initially by a family court-appointed coordinator given the ongoing military investigation, and then gradually normalized as the months passed. Megan was his mother and I was not going to take that from him, whatever she had taken from me. I saw her twice during the legal process, both times in Rebecca's office. She looked like someone under significant strain, which she was. Her hair was shorter. There were lines around her eyes that I did not remember. She was professional and contained in those meetings in the way that she had always been professional and contained when the situation required it, and I matched her register because that was the only register appropriate for a conference room with lawyers present. The second time we met in Rebecca's office to finalize signatures, she said, while the lawyers were briefly out of the room, "Peter, I need you to know that I am sorry." I know that doesn't change anything. I looked at her. I had thought about what I would say if this moment came. I had imagined saying many things, cataloging what she had cost me, articulating the specific betrayal of every sacrificed opportunity, describing what it had been like to stand at that gate with Noah on my hip. I had rehearsed and discarded a dozen versions. What I actually said was, "Take care of yourself, Megan. Noah needs his mother to be well. Not for her. For him." She nodded. She signed the papers. I signed the papers. Captain Daniel Reeves, as far as I was able to determine, did not come out of the UCMJ process unscathed either. The fraternization charge under an officer in his direct chain of command carried its own weight. He received a formal reprimand that was entered in his permanent record, and his promotion to major was delayed by 18 months pending review. Ashley had, by all accounts, moved on. He was stationed elsewhere. I did not think about him very often. He had been a symptom, not the illness. The Fort Bragg community, which had watched the whole thing unfold with the tight-knit attention that small communities give to significant events, closed around the conclusion in the way that communities do. The judgment had been rendered, the consequences distributed, and life moved on. What people remembered, I was told by several of Megan's former colleagues who had reached out to me with surprising warmth, was not the sensational facts of the affair but the image of a man who had handled himself with a notable absence of spectacle. I had not made public statements. I had not posted on social media. I had not shouted in the reunion crowd at Gate 7. I had carried my son to the car and driven home and done what needed to be done through the appropriate channels. You handled that with a lot of class, Tom said, one evening about 8 months after the divorce was finalized. We were sitting on my back porch after putting Noah to bed, a cold beer each, the sound of crickets starting up in the yard. I had a very good reason to keep my head, I said, and I gestured toward the house where Noah was sleeping. Tom nodded. He had known me for 15 years and we did not need to elaborate. The Charlotte project finished ahead of schedule and came in under budget, and the firm recognized it publicly at a quarterly meeting and offered me a partnership track that I had not anticipated for another 2 years. I accepted. The work was good and it was mine, not arranged around someone else's posting schedule, not contingent on someone else's ambitions. Mine. I turned 35. Tom and Linda threw a small party, just close friends, and Craig came down from Virginia with his wife and their 2 kids who were old enough to chase Noah around the backyard until he collapsed laughing. I stood at the edge of the yard and watched my son run through sprinklers in the late afternoon, and I tried to locate the grief I had been carrying and found that it had changed shape. It was still there, I think it will always be there in some form, the grief of a marriage failing, the loss of the future I had planned, but it was no longer the dominant weather system of my interior life. It had become something I carried rather than something that carried me. Megan and I had found a functional co-parenting rhythm by then. She had her structured weekends with Noah and she was, by all accounts and by my own observation during handoffs, a committed and present mother during those times. Noah loved her. He was too young to understand what had happened between his parents, and I was careful, very careful, never to say a word to him that would complicate his relationship with her. That was my line and I did not cross it. I was at the public library with Noah on a Thursday afternoon in April when I ran into a woman I had met briefly through the Charlotte project, a structural engineer named Claire who had been a consultant on an adjacent development and who I remembered as someone with a precise, unhurried way of thinking that I had found notable in a meeting. She was standing at the children's section with her own daughter, who appeared to be about Noah's age, and Noah walked directly to the other child and offered her a toy truck with the guileless generosity of a 2-year-old, and Claire looked up and recognized me at approximately the same moment I recognized her. We talked for an hour in the library while our children played. Then we went to the coffee shop next door while Noah and her daughter, whose name was Lily, continued their new and apparently serious friendship at the kids' table. Claire was divorced, had been for 2 years, a story she told without bitterness and with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a person who had processed the relevant grief and arrived at solid ground. She was warm and direct and she laughed easily, and she knew immediately when I made a structural engineering joke, which is a specific and underrated quality. I want to be honest about this part too. I did not fall immediately into something new because I was not in a hurry and because I owed it to Noah and to myself to move at the pace that genuine things require. Claire and I had coffee twice more, and then dinner once with the children and once without, and it was slow and careful and honest in the way that 2 people who have learned about loss tend to conduct new beginnings. There was no performance between us. There was no management. When I told her the full story of what had happened with Megan, which I did, early and plainly, because I do not want to build things on foundations of incomplete information, she listened without dramatic reaction and said, "That must have been a very hard year." "It was," I said. "It changed what I know about what I can manage." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "I think it's just a thing," I said. "I know myself better than I did. I know what I won't accept. I know what I'm building toward." She nodded. "Noah seems like the thing you're most proud of." "He is," I said. "That's a very good place to start. We have been careful and unhurried, and I find, with some surprise, that careful and unhurried is not the same as hesitant. It feels like something steady being constructed by 2 competent people who know how to read the plans." The final encounter with Megan happened just over a year after the divorce was finalized. I had not engineered it. These things rarely need engineering. In a life the size of ours, with shared custody of a child and mutual connections in a tight community, a real conversation was eventually going to happen outside the managed contexts of custody exchanges and legal meetings. It was at Noah's 2nd birthday party, which I hosted at the house. It was a small party, family, a few friends, Craig and his family, Tom and Linda, Janet. Megan had been invited because she was Noah's mother and this was a family event and I was not going to exclude her from her son's birthday. She came, and she was appropriate and warm with Noah and polite with my family, and the people there behaved like adults because the occasion required it. Toward the end of the afternoon, when the children had been corralled with juice boxes and the adults were cleaning up in that comfortable post-party way, Megan came to where I was loading the dishwasher. She stood at the edge of the kitchen. "Can I say something?" she asked. "Sure," I said. I kept loading the dishwasher. "I watch you with him," she said. "Every time. I watch what you've built here. I watch who you are with him, and she stopped. I didn't understand what I was walking away from. I understand it now. I closed the dishwasher and turned around. She was standing with her arms crossed, not in the defensive way but in the way of someone holding themselves together. She looked tired in a deep way. The UCMJ process had concluded with a formal reprimand and a reduction in the rate at which she would accrue seniority. The promotion to brigadier general had been formally withdrawn from consideration. She was still Colonel Harris, still employed by the Army, still doing the work she had given her life to, but the ceiling above her had descended and she knew it. She looked like a person who had gotten exactly what the choices warranted. I said, "I know you do, Megan. And I believe you mean that." "Peter, but it doesn't open a door," I said. "I want you to hear me say that clearly, not cruelly. It just doesn't. What we were is done. What we are now is Noah's parents, and I think we can be good at that together. That's what I'm focused on." She nodded. She was trying very hard not to show anything on her face, and she mostly succeeded, in the way that she had always mostly succeeded at exactly that. "Is there someone?" she asked. It cost her something to ask it. "That's not something I'm going to discuss with you," I said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever, depending on how the co-parenting goes." She nodded again. "Go be with Noah," I said. "He's been looking for you." She turned and went toward the living room where Noah was engaged in what appeared to be an extremely important negotiation over a balloon animal, and I stood at the kitchen counter for a moment and let the conversation settle. I had felt, when I imagined that conversation in the months preceding it, that I would feel something large, vindication or anger or the satisfaction of watching someone fully understand the weight of what they had done. What I actually felt was very quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a long storm when the air is still and clean and you walk outside and the world looks rinsed. Tom found me in the kitchen. He poured 2 inches of good bourbon into 2 glasses and set one in front of me. "You okay?" he said. "Yeah," I said, and I was surprised to find it was true. "She looks bad," he said. "She's living with her choices," I said. "That's all." He raised his glass. I raised mine. We didn't say anything else because we didn't need to. In the years that followed, I measured the shape of my life against what it had been and found that the accounting came out in a direction I had not anticipated when I stood at gate 7 with a drooping sign and a child on my hip. My work was flourishing in the way that work flourishes when you are fully present for it. My son was healthy and curious and funny and attached, a small person constructing his sense of the world with commendable confidence. My home felt like mine, actually mine, built to my specifications without the ongoing negotiation of a marriage that had been running on one engine for longer than I knew. Craig and I became genuinely close in a way that the years of family politics had prevented. He visited every few months and we had become the kind of friends who could be honest with each other, which is the only kind worth having. His kids and Noah had developed the chaotic, loyal bond of cousins who actually choose each other. Claire and I took things at our measured pace and found, somewhere around the 14-month mark, that the pace had naturally arrived at something that felt settled and solid. She had dinner at my house regularly enough that Noah called her by name without prompting and reached for her hand in parking lots, which is the highest available endorsement from a 2.5-year-old. She and Lily had Saturdays together and some of those Saturdays Noah was there too, and the 4 of us had developed a specific domestic rhythm that felt nothing like performance. "Are you happy?" Tom asked me once. We were running together, one of our Saturday morning routes, and it was the kind of question that comes out of nowhere in the middle of mile 4. I thought about it seriously, the way the question deserves. "Yes," I said. Not despite what happened. Just, yes. The last I heard of Megan's situation came from Craig, who maintained some contact with her for Noah's sake. She was still at Fort Bragg. She had thrown herself into her command with the total focus that I recognized as what Megan did when everything else was removed. She was reportedly respected, still, for her operational competence. That had never been the question. She lived alone. She had not, as far as Craig knew, been in any serious relationship since. She attended every custody exchange on time and appropriately, and her interactions with Noah during his visits were, by his increasingly verbal account, warm and engaged and good. She was living a contained life, smaller than the one she had planned, and I believe she carried the weight of the choices that had made it that way. I did not wish her suffering. I had moved past the phase where I needed her to suffer. What I wished her, if I wished her anything, was enough self-awareness to be a good mother to our son, and in that one department she appeared to be delivering. I was at my desk one morning, a Tuesday in October, 2 years from the September afternoon at Gate 7, and I was reviewing structural specifications for a bridge project that was the most technically complex work of my career, and Noah was at daycare and the house was quiet, and through the window I could see the yard where the leaves were going orange the way they had gone orange that particular September 2 years ago, and I realized that I had not thought about the gate in months. I had not thought about the collar adjustment or the salute or the look or the 4 seconds of understanding. I had not thought about the bathroom with the fan running or the notes app or the manila envelope. Those things were part of the architecture of what I was now, integrated and load-bearing and no longer visible because they were inside the walls, but they were not the view from my window. The view from my window was ordinary and full and mine. Noah, who had recently turned 3, had a new thing he did when I picked him up from daycare. He would be playing, absorbed in whatever 3-year-olds find necessary, and when I appeared in the doorway he would look up and say, "There's my dad," with the specific satisfaction of someone confirming the location of the most important thing. Then he would run to me. "There's my dad." Every single time. I was there. I was always going to be there. That was the thing I had held onto in the hotel bathroom and at the kitchen table and in every careful, deliberate move I had made in the year that followed the gate. Not revenge, not justice, though those had come in their appropriate measures. Just this, being the person who shows up. Being the person he runs to. I picked him up and he threw his arms around my neck and told me with great urgency about a story they had read at school involving a bear who lost his hat, and I listened to every word with complete attention, and we walked to the car in the October afternoon with his hand in mine, and the sky above Fort Bragg was the particular blue that October produces when it's trying to be remembered. I didn't look back.